Good morning, Woodland fifth grade. Let's go. Let's go. It is the 137th day of school today. It is April 14th, Tuesday, April 14th, 2020, day 6 of our 6-day cycle. And like I said, the 137th day of school. How did I know that? Well, my son's kindergarten teacher said, so I'm trusting her. Miss Mag over at Mount Horeb, I'm hoping that she's correct, and today is indeed the 137th day of school. On this day in history, April 14th, a few fun facts for us out there. In 1918, World War I raging. First aerial dogfight takes place. That's an aircraft-to-aircraft battle that had been new at the time. Just think about that. You know, aircrafts, 1918 is a new thing. Pretty wild, huh? At least aircraft-to-aircraft battles. On April 14th in 1865, sadly, John Wilkes Booth shoots Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," which means ever thus to tyrants. And unfortunately, Lincoln died the next morning, first U.S. president to be assassinated. In 1935, they called it Black Sunday. That was the Dust Bowl storm that was striking. You can look up that today. That might be something to kind of do your own little research on between today and tomorrow. The Dust Bowl, back in 1935, they called it Black Sunday. You had these amazing dust storms strike, and it was throughout Kansas, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. It was a wild scene. The day would go from completely fine, and then these storms would come through and just whip up. Lack of farmland and crops would just kind of just roll through the area, and you'd wind up having these huge dust storms, which was incredible. And of course, in 1912, on this date in history, the Titanic sinks in the North Atlantic with over 1,500 people dying and 705, mostly wealthier people, surviving. Birthdays today. Oh yeah, Baker Mayfield turning 25. Pete Rose, 79, baseball fame. Sarah Michelle Gellar, actress, is 43. She was born in 1977, like me. And four-time Cy Young pitcher Greg Maddux, he turns 54. Part of my childhood, Greg Maddux was a dominant pitcher for the Braves. In entertainment news, I know many of you will think back to your couple of years ago when Puppy Dog Pals premiered on this day in 2017. And that is all that I have for you on the news front this morning. All right, let's talk schoolwork now. Yesterday, I checked in with you, starting this Titanic project up. Again, we're kind of going to move at this at a little bit of a pace where I'm going to ask you to make sure that you complete certain things each day. So you'll notice in the reading on Google Classroom, I'm asking you to please work on slide 3, finish taking your notes on the notes page that I did push out to you. So all your notes should be on there, and you'll use that throughout this entire project so I can see that you're taking notes from what you're reading, as well as performing and answering questions and on the various slides for the Titanic project. What else did I want to tell you? Have pushed out a couple of things on iReady Reading, and as well as on iReady Math for today. All right. So stay on top of your work. Don't fall behind. I had 18 entries on Padlet yesterday. That means 2 people are shy. So we've got to find out who that might be, and we got to get on top of that. So 18 people checked in. Please, if you don't catch me live, which I know some of you don't do, that's quite all right. If you watch the replay, that's fine. But 18 people, not the full 20. So if you miss me live or you don't have time, you do have to go back and then please fill in your various entries on Padlet. All right, let's go. Picking up on chapter 2, with permission from Scholastic, we're reading Gordon Korman's Titanic, Unsinkable. You ready? Chapter 2 is entitled Chapter 2 is entitled London. It says Friday, March 29th, 1912, 11:45 a.m. Piccadilly Circus was always one of the busiest areas of London. But today, busy was an inadequate description. Hundreds of horse-drawn carriages and automobiles powered by gasoline, steam, and electric motors were locked at a standstill in the roundabout. Klaxons honked, Bells rang, and angry drivers and coachmen bellowed their frustrations at top volume. The traffic extended up to 5 main streets that fed the circle, especially choking crowded Regent Street. The cacophony of, that's a great word, the cacophony of protest grew louder and louder. No one was going anywhere. The cause of this huge disruption to London life was perched on the pedestal of the statue of Eros at the center of the roundabout. Mrs. Amelia Bronson of Boston, Massachusetts, the famous American suffragist, was holding a rally in place where she knew it would draw the most attention. Her strident voice, directed by a large cone megaphone, rose above the general din. "Votes for women!" she thundered, provoking a chant from the mass of female humanity, resplendent in the colors of their movement, purple, white, and green. "Votes for women!" they shouted back, making the air ring with their demand. "Move out of the road, you shameless baggage!" bellowed a lorry driver. Other cries echoed his sentiments, their words not so polite. London saw its share of political activism for a wide variety of causes, but not from women, who were expected to be obedient and demure. Start thinking about now this time period, right? 1912. That line there that Gordon Korman chose to write. London saw its share of political activism for a wide variety of causes, but not from women, who were expected to be obedient and demure, like just follow, don't speak up, act their place, right? That was the time period. You think about how different that is, 108 years later. It's incredible, right? Can't even imagine a time period where women weren't allowed to speak their mind. The suffragettes were considered unfeminine, rebellious, and even immoral. The crowd was growing ugly. 14-year-old Sophie Bronson reached up and tugged at the hem of her mother's dress. "Mother," she said in a low voice, and was ignored. "Mother," a little louder this time. "Not now, Sophie. Things are escalating." "I know they are," her daughter replied. "This isn't like Boston or Hartford or Providence. You can feel the rage in the air." "That rage is the tool men use to cling to outmoded system, where half the population is kept as second-class citizens." "Mother, you know as well as I do that most of this rage is from people who only wish to get on their way past Piccadilly Circus." Sharp whistle blasts bit into the chill air. "Here come the police," Sophie exclaimed. "You're going to be arrested again." "I'm counting on it." The mom's counting on being arrested. Amelia Bronson beamed. "I didn't journey all the way to England to be ignored by the papers." Sophie groaned. "Then everything they say about you will be true. You really are a radical foreign agitator." "I am what I need to be for the good of our movement," was Amelia's reply. The bobbies, those are the police, came upon the throng, dozens of them, arresting the women en masse, shouting and shoving them roughly. Amelia Bronson jumped down from the pedestal, held her arms out in front of her, and declared, "Go ahead, clap me in irons. Show the world, your own wives and your own mothers, how you hate women." "Got nothing against women, Mum," said one constable in a strained voice. "It's American troublemakers what gives me a problem." He made to shackle her wrists, and a large Englishwoman ripped off his helmet by the chin strap and began beating him with it. The constable wheeled on her and brought his truncheon down on top of her head. Sophie had resolved to stay out of the fray. Back at home in Boston, her father had assigned her such duties as keeping her mother out of prison and bailing her out of jail. But when Sophie saw the blood running down the face of the suffragist who tried to defend Amelia Bronson, a red haze descended over her vision. She attacked the constable, leaping onto his back and wrapping her arms around his head. Her arrest followed hard upon. Later, in the horse-drawn paddy wagon, Sophie was forced to endure the further humiliation of criticism from her mother as the prisoners all sat chained together by the ankles. Sophie stared at her mother. "You were arrested too?" That was necessary for us to get the publicity we require for our movement, Amelia Bronson lectured. It was a calculated decision made long before the policemen arrived on the scene. What you did was dangerous and unnecessary. It added nothing to the cause, and it will be very difficult for you to post my bond when you, too, are in a cell. Sophie shut her eyes and held her tongue. To the rhythm of the hoofbeats on the cobblestone, she counted the days until April 10, when she would finally get her mother out of England. She could never have imagined how difficult it would be to keep Amelia Bronson free of trouble without father on hand. The only thing that kept her going was the anticipation of the exciting trip home. In less than 2 weeks, they would be sailing on the newest, largest, and most spectacular ship in the world, the RMS Titanic. I'll pause there, jot down a few thoughts on chapter 2. So we have this rabble-rouser here of the time period, I guess you would say, Amelia Bronson. Okay. She is clearly an American, and she's come to England to shout for women's rights. She's there with her daughter. And, obviously she's arrested for her part in this fracas, I guess you could say, in near Piccadilly Circus, which is a section of London. Okay. Give you a moment. And of course, make sure you're labeling each chapter as you're making your thoughts over there. So this way, because there are four chapters that are part of this Padlet discussion here. So this way I can see your thinking throughout. All right, let's move on. Chapter 3, Southampton, it's called. Sunday, March 31st, 1912, 9:40 a.m. Posters of the Titanic adorned all four walls in the offices of the White Star Line. Okay, so we've got White Star Line. I think we discussed that. We've got Harland and Wolff is the shipyard, but then Titanic is actually like today you have Royal Caribbean or Celebrity or Carnival or Norwegian Cruise Lines. Well, White Star Line is the cruise line that actually wound up making the Titanic. So White Star Line. Okay. Posters of the Titanic adorned all four walls in the offices of the White Star Line. Every conceivable image, from photographs of the shipbuilding process through artists' renditions of glorious ballrooms and dining saloons to advertisements boasting of the luxury brand of soap used in the first-class water closets. With the maiden voyage is the very first voyage, a scant 10 days away, the place hummed with activity. People thronged the third-class ticket desk in search of a last-minute passage, and the chatter of different languages filled the air as foreigners struggled to make themselves understood. At the opposite end of the building, White Star officials were hiring hordes of waiters, stewards, maids, and laundry and kitchen workers. The Titanic offered features that had never been dreamed of on other ships. Employees were required to perform dozens of onboard functions, like trainers for the gymnasium and attendants for the swimming pool and Turkish baths. When the great ship set sail on April 10th, she would carry nearly 900 crew members, most of whom would have nothing to do with the nautical operation of the ship. One visitor, though, had business completely unrelated to the pride of the White Star Line. He was the youngest person in the office, thin, round-shouldered, practically swimming in a worn overcoat with patched elbows and frayed cuffs. 15-year-old Alfie Huggins, that's A-L-F-I-E, Huggins, Huggins, Alfie Huggins, stood at the paymaster's wicket with his certificate of birth unfolded on the counter. According to company records, said the clerk, looking down on him through thick glasses perched on the end of his nose, your father's pay goes to, he squinted at the ledger in front of him, Sarah Huggins. That's my ma, Alfie explained, pointing out the name on the certificate. We'll just send her around and she can sign for the money. Alfie's face fell. I can't. Why not? Is she ill? She's gone. Gone? You mean dead? Gone. And she's not coming back. It was a tough thing to admit. Who knew why his mother had married his father in the first place? John Huggins was a stoker for the White Star Line. His wife was dreamy and silly, and her husband was away at sea all the time, leaving her with a young son to raise. And what's your name again? The clerk prompted. Alfie, for Alphonse. He indicated the paper once again. Ma was exactly the kind of person to name her only child after the hero in one of the French penny novels she loved so well. And where is she now? He wondered wistfully. Try as he might, he could not bring himself to stay mad at her for deserting him. For some reason, he pictured her crossing the continent on an exotic and glamorous train. The truth was probably more like a milliner's shop in London, trimming hats with artificial flowers and braid. Whatever it was, he hoped she was happy. The clerk's voice interrupted his thoughts. I'm sorry, lad. Your name isn't anywhere on these instructions. I can't pay you. Alfie swallowed hard. But how am I to feed myself, sir? I have no money at all. The clerk was sympathetic, but firm. It says here that your pa is signed on to the Titanic. Several of the Olympics, remember that's the sister ship, several of the Olympics engine crew are laying over in Belfast until the new ship is ready to sail. He should be here on Wednesday. 3 days? Alfie's heart soared. Of course, he would be proper hungry by then. But at least Dad was coming home. Still, if he was now part of the Titanic's crew, he'd be gone again. Alfie checked one of the posters. On April 10th. And this time, I'll be all alone like a dog in the street. His eyes fell on the line of hopefuls waiting to be interviewed for Titanic jobs. When the solution came to him, it seemed so obvious, it was a wonder he hadn't thought of it sooner. How do you stay with a seafaring father? By sailing the same seas on the same vessel. He folded up his certificate and stuffed it far into his pocket. Now, all he had to do was lie a little about his age. Okay, it's the end of chapter 3. So we're meeting all these various characters, and of course, these are fictional characters, right? Alphonse, he's a fictional character. His father's a fictional character aboard the line. Look, he's a stoker, which means somebody that will put the coal into the various engines. Okay, give you a moment or two just to kind of throw some thoughts down. I'm going to take a little read on over here. I see a couple of you just kind of just posted on in there that you don't know much about the Titanic and, you know, the time period. So that's a good thing, right? A void in history. I think a lot of you know a lot about history when it comes down to the Revolution or maybe even, you know, the Civil War and things like that. But this time period in the early 1900s was legendary in United States history for women specifically. The ability to fight for their own rights and voting and you know, various things. It really, really was a great time period. So to kind of learn a little bit of side history here while doing the Titanic unit, I think is great. All right, chapter 4. Let's go. It's entitled Belfast. And I want to give you time today, so I'm going to watch my timing. Let's see how long this chapter takes. Belfast, Tuesday, April 2nd, 1912, 3:30 p.m. It had once been a printer's shop. The ink-stained tables, metal rollers, and loose type attested to that. But to Patty and Daniel, it was home. This was not due to the comforts. There were none. It was because the missing bricks in the wall outside provided the footholds to climb the fire stairs, which rendered convenient access to the loose board covering what had once been a window. The palace gate, they called it. The shop was no palace, but it was shelter from the cold, damp weather. And it was a place of their own. which was more than 2 destitute street youths had any right to expect. One feature of the print shop was a large stack of paper, very dusty, but only slightly yellowed. Daniel was always sketching. In a different world, Patty was certain his friend would have become a famous inventor or designer. Right now, Daniel was completely focused on his promise to Thomas Andrews. He was going to dream up a way for the unsinkable Titanic to sink, or he was going to die trying. For the past 5 days, he had thought of little else. At 8 o'clock tonight, the great ship was scheduled to leave Belfast for Southampton, England, the starting point of her much-anticipated maiden voyage. Mr. Andrews would be sailing with her. In all likelihood, if Daniel could not come up with something before then, he would never see the man again. Patty could not quite grasp what fascinated his friend to the point of obsession. It's a boat, Daniel. It's not a boat, it's a ship. Remember that. It's a boat, Daniel. If you put a hole in the bottom, it'll sink. Are you forgetting the watertight compartments? Daniel challenged, reaching for one of the many drawings that covered the old editor's table. This one showed Titanic's long hull, which is the bottom, that part of the ship that is in the waterline. The long hull divided by 15 bulkheads. It doesn't matter where the breach is. The captain has only to close the 2 doors around it to contain the water. Mr. Andrews said he could stay afloat with any 4 of those compartments flooded. Patty shrugged. It seems simple to me. Flood 5. Daniel shook his head. It would never happen. A steamship isn't like a locomotive that can travel 60 miles an hour. He indicated another sketch. This one, the Titanic striking a sister ship broadside. Even a full-speed collision with another vessel would only flood 1 compartment, maybe perhaps 2. Patty looked thoughtful. Maybe your precious Titanic isn't the one doing the hitting. What if some other big boat runs into it? Her, Daniel corrected. It would be the same. The other ship's prow would damage 1, maybe 2 compartments, but no more. He looked frustrated. And there's a double hull. Even if a boiler explodes, it wouldn't break through both of them. A fire on board might do a lot of damage, but it wouldn't burn through heavy gauge metal. Patty put a hand on his friend's shoulder. If it was easy, your friend Mr. Andrews would have thought of it. He would have thought of it already. But you're smarter than any starched up dandy. You'll figure it out. Now, let's go put our bellies around some food. The meat pies should be going on to the sill at Odell's just about now. Not even the promise of a savory meal could wrest Daniel from his sketching. I'll go later, he said absently. And remember, don't spend those banknotes. Patty cast him a cheeky grin. Spend? When's the last time you saw me pay for what I eat? And he was over the sill and out of the window. A little bit of time passes. It almost didn't count as stealing with Mrs. Odell anymore. Ever since Patty had chased that huge rat out of her larder, oh my God, she'd look the other way every time he helped himself to one of her Cornish pastries. If he ever got rich, he would pay Mrs. Odell back for every single one he had nicked. He walked along St. Bart's Street, gazing idly into the shop windows and licking his fingers. Daniel didn't know what he was missing. Who would pass up a full stomach to spend the day staring at diagrams of a boat? Sometimes the smart people seemed more stupid than the dullards. But he reflected with pride. If anybody could come up with a way to sink Thomas Andrews' unsinkable boat, it would be Daniel. Walking past the window of stationer's shop, he saw a gorgeous milk-white drawing pad with a complete set of pencils, ink pens, and charcoals of every imaginable thickness. Why, armed with this, Daniel could design a way to scuttle the entire Royal Navy. A small card beside the display announced that the price of the kit was 3 crowns 6 pence. It was more money than Patty had ever touched in his life, except for the gold clip he had taken from the man in the houndstooth cloak. Why, with that windfall, he could afford a dozen of these kits, and have change left over. He was on the point of running back to where they'd stashed the gold clip when he stopped in his tracks. Daniel had made him promise not to spend any of those banknotes. But what was the point of having money if you could never spend it? No point at all. And Daniel would forgive him when he saw the wondrous gift he was getting. Patty ran to the hiding place and found the stash safe and sound. He plucked a single crisp note out of the clip and knew a moment of temptation. If it was a good thing to purchase this for Daniel, perhaps it made sense to buy each of them a new suit of clothes. If they weren't dressed so shabbily, no one would be suspicious of the money they spent. And they would get closer to a better quality of pocket if they weren't always being chased away as ragamuffins. No, he decided. Just buy the kit. Leave the rest of the money here. He headed back toward the stationer's. A little bit of time passes. As morning became afternoon, Daniel began to regret passing up the meat pie. A fellow couldn't very well think on an empty stomach. The lines of his Titanic drawings were starting to unravel and dance before his eyes. It was not going well. Either that, or Mr. Andrews really had designed an unsinkable ship. Daniel reached for a fresh pencil, accidentally scraping his arm against a patch of splintered wood on the old table. Ow! He examined the damage. An angry red scratch stretched from his wrist to his elbow. Suddenly, the answer was right in front of him. He was assuming it would take a spectacular crash to sink a mighty ship like the Titanic. But maybe he was approaching the whole problem the wrong way. His skin had barely touched that splintered wood, and yet it left a wound along the entire length of his forearm. Could the same thing happen to an ocean liner? Not a devastating collision, but a side swipe that opened a long breach extending through several of her watertight compartments. She could float with damage to 4, but what if it was 5, or 10, or all 16? She would sink. That's what. He began to sketch with a new energy and excitement. When he was finished with the diagram, he wrote his name and date across the top. He couldn't wait to explain his theory to Patty. Yet the urge to show it to the designer of the Titanic himself was almost physical pain. He had to get this drawing in front of Thomas Andrews before the shipbuilder's magnificent creation bore him halfway around the world. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll stop there. It's 9:38. We'll leave you on a little bit of a cliffhanger there. Remember, I am not here tomorrow to read to you, so we'll reconvene on Thursday. And on Thursday, I'll probably try to, move us along maybe about 30 pages. So I'll do a little extra reading on Thursday. Remember, tomorrow is your virtual day where you'll do a virtual field trip. The librarians, once again, planning another extraordinary day for you. So I look forward to hearing the reviews on that. My own son at Mount Horrible taking part in it. So I'm very excited about that. And I hope you have a great day. Any questions? I'm on email, edmodome, and April 14th, 1912, Titanic sinks. Look on the History Channel. Maybe they'll have something tonight, tomorrow. I didn't check that in advance, so I'm just throwing that out there. But they might have some documentaries on TV that you might be interested in. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Cheers.